When you think of a good day, what is it that comes to mind? When I think of a good day, I oftentimes think about the days that have been influential in my life, that have changed my trajectory in significant ways. I think, for instance, of my wedding day. I'll never forget it. It was August 4th, 2001. I still remember standing in the back of the church waiting for the wedding ceremony to begin, and over my right shoulder, my friend Wes Tillett from college walked in. I didn't expect for him to be there. It was a surprise to me, but I just remember thinking in that moment, I can't believe that family and friends have come to gather to celebrate in our special day. I remember when Melissa's dad walked her down the aisle, and I was standing in front of the church with the pastor, and before the giving away of the bride, I jumped the gun a little bit, and I went to get Melissa before it was time, and her dad looked at me one last time and said, whoa, settle down. I'll never forget that day. That was a good day. I remember the birth of my children. We had the date circled on the calendar for Cademan, our oldest. Melissa was going to be induced. The day of his delivery, Melissa and I went out to celebrate by eating pancakes together. And I remember standing or sitting across the table from her and asking her, "Hey, Melissa, what are you doing today?" And she said, "I'm having a baby." Never forget that day. I'll never forget what it was like to drive to Grand Rapids, Michigan for the birth of Noah, our second son. It was early in the morning, and I was so excited to have another boy come into the family. I'll never forget the day that Amelia was born. It was a super day. It was a Sunday. It was Super Bowl Sunday. I'll never forget it because it was a great game between the New England Patriots and the New York Giants. It was a real nail-biter. That's not why I remember the day. I remember the day because I got a phone call in the afternoon. I looked at my phone, and Melissa's number popped up on my phone, and I thought to myself, oh, it's game time. Not that game time, but it's baby game time. And I picked up the phone and said hello, and Cademan, who I believe was 6 or maybe 7 years old at the time, said, "Dad, Mom's water just broke." And I said, "Cademan, you don't even know what that means. Give the phone to your mother." And he did, and she said, "It's game time." Those were good days. When you think about a good day, what comes to mind? Today is Good Friday. It's Good Friday. It seems like a strange name, though, doesn't it? Because we read in the gospel account, John chapter 19, verse 1, "Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe, and they came up to him saying, 'Hail, the King of the Jews,' and they struck him with their hands." Good Friday. Billy read just moments ago, John chapter 19, verse 17. It says, "They went out bearing his own cross to a place called the place of a skull," which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. And there they crucified him with 2 others on either side of him and Jesus between them. Good Friday. Later in John chapter 9, it says, "Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scriptures, 'I thirst,' and a jar full of sour wine stood there. So they put a sponge full of the sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. And when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, 'It is finished.' And he bowed his head and he gave up his spirit." Good Friday. Good Friday, the day that Jesus died, the day that Jesus suffered, the day that he was beaten, the day that he was pinned to a cross, the day that my sin and your sin killed the Son of God. Good Friday? Yes. Yes, it was good. It was Good Friday because Good Friday is a day when God's perfect justice collided with God's radical love. His perfect justice collided with His radical love. We know in Scripture that God is just. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 4, the rock, His work is perfect, for all His ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is He. In Genesis 18:25, Abraham appealed to God's justice and said, "Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" Isaiah 45, verse 19, "I, the Lord, speak the truth. I declare what is right." God is just. I think all of us were born at least with some sense of justice. Maybe we didn't have a word for it when we were little, but we certainly felt it, and more than likely, we experienced it. Don't believe me? On Easter Sunday, if you have young children, call them down to the kitchen table and give one child a chocolate bunny and give nothing to the other one. See what happens. If you don't believe that we have a sense of justice, then walk into your daughter's room and empty her piggy bank and distribute it among her brothers. And see how she responds. If you don't think that we have some sense of justice within us, sit your family down, remind them that with rising inflation, you're going to need to experience some cutbacks as a family, and then turn around and go buy yourself something nice. Oh, see what happens. I believe that all of us somewhere have some sense of justice in us, because when we experience injustice, we shout from the rooftop, "That's not fair." That's not fair. We have this sense of justice, and yet we long for love. When Melissa and I were dating, maybe we were just married, we went out for a family meal. Her sister was there at the table at the time. Her sister had a little boy who was probably 4, maybe 3 or 4 years old. His name was Jordan. I still remember that family meal because Jordan was acting his age. If you're a parent and you've ever been out to a restaurant with a 2, 3, 4-year-old, you know that things can quickly go south, and they went south. Jordan was not a happy camper. Jen was a patient mother. But as Jordan continued to act up and stand on the booth and maybe throw a cheesy biscuit or two, she had finally had enough. She had threatened him with a spanking, but he was having none of it. He kept acting out. So finally, she said, "Enough is enough," and she picked up Jordan in her arms and began to walk to the bathroom. And Jordan, as he was walking away from the table, turned his head and looked back at us and his mother, who was holding him, and said, "Mommy, don't spank me, love me. Mommy, don't spank me, love me." And yet, Melissa's sister, Jen, was completely in the right to discipline her boy. He had acted out. He had been disobedient. And yet he longed for love. The story of Good Friday is a story of God's justice. It's a story of God's justice. God is just. He cannot ignore sin or turn his back on sin or simply sweep it under the rug. And yet, the one who stretched out his hands on that day was not humanity in experiencing the punishment or discipline of God. Instead, the one who stretched out his hands was Jesus. Good Friday is good because God's perfect justice collides with God's radical love. God is also loving. He's not more loving than he is just, and he's not more just than he is loving. He is perfectly just, and he is completely loving. We read it all throughout the pages of Scripture. God demonstrates his love for us, and that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. 1 John 3:1 says, "See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are." God's love surpasses comprehension. It is more explosive than explanation. It's deeper than any human definition. It's more extravagant than the very best of illustrations. God's love is sacrificial and costly. It's unexplainable and uncontainable. It extends to the heavens. This is God's love on display. Good Friday was good because God's perfect justice collided with God's radical love. The wrath of God was satisfied. The way for sinners to come to God was secured. The work of Jesus was completed. And so we, as a people of God, gather together this night, and we sing and we say that Jesus paid it all. All to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow.